They signed me off to die at 10:46 p.m. on Thursday, and they thought I would never wake up to ask why. My name is Ava Reynolds. I am 32 years old. I work as a paralegal at a small law firm in Chicago. My job is to read contracts, verify signatures, and catch the small details other people overlook. I never thought I would have to do that with my own family. That night, I did not hear my father speak. I did not hear the pen touch paper. I did not hear the steady monitor in the ICU. But I know exactly what time he signed. 10:46 p.m. Thursday. He did not ask the doctor if I was in pain. He did not ask what my chances of recovery were. He asked one question: how much will it cost? When he heard the number, he said, "Stop. Do not do anything else." Then he signed the do not resuscitate order. No shaking hands, no hesitation. He signed my name out of this life, the way someone cancels an insurance policy. He believed that before sunrise the hospital would call him with the time of death. He believed everything would end quietly. He did not know I would wake up 3 weeks later. And he certainly did not know that within 24 hours of me opening my eyes, everything he had built over 15 years would begin to fall apart. If you feel a chill hearing that, ask yourself one thing. If you found out your own father signed papers for you to die, what would you do first? Stay silent and handle it through the law, or step into the light and say the truth out loud? Keep that answer in your mind, because this did not begin in the ICU. It began long before that. 6 months before the accident, I drove 45 minutes every weekend to a small red brick house in Naperville. The porch creaked when the wind blew. There was an old rocking chair, and there was always a faint smell of cinnamon in the kitchen. My grandmother, Evelyn Hart, 78, lived there alone. She had been an accountant. She was the only person in my family who never told me I was a burden. I grew up with that word. When I was 10, I was hospitalized with severe pneumonia. The medical bill became something my father repeated for years. Do you know how much you cost this family? At 16, I worked part-time. At 18, I took out my own student loans. My sister Brooke had a car at 17. I took the bus. Her tuition was fully paid. I signed my loan papers alone. I was not angry. That was the most dangerous part. I believed I owed them. I believed my existence was an unpaid invoice. My grandmother never spoke about debt. She asked if I had eaten. She asked if I was sleeping enough. One late fall afternoon, as we sat on the porch, she said something I did not understand at the time. When the time comes, call Thomas Klein. Do not call anyone else. I laughed. I thought she was just being overly cautious. My father hated that I visited her. He said I was wasting time. He said she was confused. But she was not confused. She remembered every number, every story, every detail my father hoped she would forget. She passed away on a quiet Monday morning. The funeral was handled quickly. My father controlled everything. He would not let me speak. He said, "Keep it brief." I stood in the back as the casket closed, and for the first time in my life I felt something was being hidden. I did not know she had created a separate will. I did not know she had worked with an attorney unfamiliar to my family. I did not know my name was written on a document my father did not know existed. I only knew that 3 months later, I was driving home from a late shift. Light rain. The dashboard clock read 11:17 p.m. I remember the number because I was calculating how many hours I could sleep before my morning shift. I never finished the math. A pickup truck ran a red light. It slammed into the driver's side of my car at a speed police later said was over 50 miles per hour. I remember the sound of metal crushing. I remember glass shattering. I remember trying to say my name to the paramedics. Then everything went dark. In the emergency room, they said I had a traumatic brain injury, 2 broken ribs, and internal bleeding. They said I needed further intervention. A decision had to be made that night. The emergency contact in my file was Frank Reynolds, my father. He arrived at the hospital at 10:32 p.m. He did not go into my room first. He went straight to billing. He asked one question: how much will it cost? And when he heard the number, he signed 10:46 p.m. Thursday. He believed I would never wake up to ask why. But he forgot one thing. I work with documents, and I never overlook a signature. I do not remember ever hating my father. I remember getting used to the feeling of owing him. After my hospitalization at 10, every argument in the house returned to a number. The bill, the cost, what insurance did not cover. I did not understand the math, but I understood the look in his eyes when he looked at me, like I was a failed investment. Brooke never heard those words. She did well in school, she was outgoing, she knew how to say what adults wanted to hear. I was quieter. I liked reading, sitting for hours with a book. I was not good at making people comfortable. In my house, that meant I was wrong. At 16, I asked to work at a grocery store. I said I wanted independence. My father said, "Good. Finally, less money wasted." I did not know if it was praise or a reminder. When Brooke left for college, my parents threw a large party. They took photos, posted on Facebook, wrote about how proud they were. When I enrolled in community college and later transferred into a paralegal program, there was no party, just one sentence. "You handle it yourself." I did. I learned to read every clause in my apartment lease. I learned to check every line in my paycheck. I learned not to trust a promise without a signature beneath it. That is why I am good at my job. And that is why when I woke up in a hospital bed, I did not need anyone to explain that a signature can change everything. My grandmother was the only person who ever told me I did not owe anyone for surviving. One winter afternoon, snow covering the porch, she set a cup of tea in front of me and said, "You are not anyone's bill. You are a person." I remember forcing a smile, because deep down, I did not fully believe it. Around that time, my father became more active in the local church. He organized fundraisers. He fixed roofs for struggling families. He was mentioned during services, a man of responsibility and faith. I watched him at the podium speak about family and sacrifice, and I wondered if I had imagined the words said in our kitchen. Maybe I was too sensitive. Brooke always stood beside him at those events. Well-dressed, smiling, holding his arm for photos. I usually stood in the back. No one noticed. I was used to that. 6 months before the accident, my grandmother called me over urgently. She sat at the dining table with a thin folder in front of her. She said, "Ava, I have taken care of some things. Do not tell your father." My heart started beating faster. She explained she no longer trusted that everything would be divided fairly if she passed. Not because she hated anyone, but because she had observed long enough. She repeated the name I once heard on the porch. Thomas Klein, an estate attorney. She said all documents were notarized separately. She placed her hand over mine. "When the time comes, do not let anyone make you feel you have no right to ask questions." I nodded, but I still did not imagine the worst case. I did not imagine lying motionless in the ICU while my father stood at billing calculating costs. After her funeral, I tried to ask about the will. My father said everything would be handled properly. He said I did not need to worry. I was used to not being given explanations, so I stepped back. That was the last mistake I allowed myself to make. 3 months later, when I woke beneath the white hospital lights, I did not yet know that while I was unconscious, other papers had been signed. Not only the DNR, not only the decision to stop treatment, but documents related to the red brick house in Naperville, the house with cinnamon and the rocking chair, the house where my grandmother once said, "When the time comes, call Thomas Klein." I remembered that when Nurse Angela pulled a chair closer and said, "Ava, there is something you need to know, not just about that night, but about what happened after your father left the hospital." I looked at her, my throat still raw from the breathing tube, my head heavy from medication, but I knew one thing. It did not end with a signature at 10:46 p.m., and this time, I would not step back. I woke on a morning without the sound of family. No father. No sister. The first thing I saw was a pale blue uniform adjusting the IV beside my bed. Nurse Angela. She turned when she saw my eyes open and said softly, "Hi, Ava. You are back." It sounded simple, but I understood it meant I had gone somewhere they were not sure I would return from. My throat burned. I tried to speak, but only managed a broken whisper. Angela placed a hand on my shoulder and told me not to push it. She said I had been in a coma 21 days. 21 days without knowing who stood beside my bed. 21 days long enough for someone to sign me off to die and then return to their life as if nothing happened. I asked with my eyes. Where is my family? Angela hesitated before answering. They came once, then they did not return. I was not shocked. I felt a cold space open in my chest. Then she moved her chair closer and said, Ava, there is something I think you need to know. I closed my eyes briefly and gathered strength to listen. She described that night. My father arrived at 10:32 p.m. He did not go into my room immediately. He went to billing to ask about cost. When the doctor explained I still had a chance of recovery, he asked for the percentage. When he heard it was not absolute, he said no further measures were necessary. 10:46 p.m. He signed the do not resuscitate order. I did not cry. I asked hoarsely. Who canceled it? Angela answered. Your proxy. It took a second to register. At 25, after working at my first law office, I had signed a healthcare proxy. My designated agent was Jenna Morales, my college best friend. I did that because I believed decisions about my life should not depend on pressure or emotion. I never imagined it would save me. Angela said when she reviewed my file, she found the proxy. She called Jenna at 11:03 p.m. Jenna arrived at 11:28. She revoked the DNR and authorized the procedure to continue. If she had been an hour later, the outcome might have been different. I closed my eyes. I did not think about death. I thought about how quickly my father calculated compared to love. Angela continued, There is more. When your father left the hospital, he said something to the front desk staff. She showed me a copy of an internal note. The quote was recorded verbatim. If the girl does not make it, call me. Do not make a scene. Do not make a scene. As if my death would be an inconvenience, I asked. Did he come back? Angela shook her head. No. But the next morning the hospital received a call from a notary office asking to confirm your condition. My heartbeat quickened. A notary office. Confirming my condition. I had worked long enough in legal offices to know those questions often appear when someone prepares documents regarding property or authority. Angela said she could not provide more details, but she felt I should know. Because something felt wrong. I did not blame her for not speaking sooner. I understand every hospital role has limits, but I knew from that moment this was not just a cruel decision made in the night. It was a sequence, planned, ordered, timed. I asked to see Jenna. When she entered the room, her eyes were red and her hands trembled. She apologized for not calling me before signing. I squeezed her hand and said, You did the right thing. She told me my father had already left when she arrived. He said he needed rest. He said if I survived, it would be a miracle. I almost laughed. And from a nurse who did not ignore a detail. That afternoon, the doctor examined me. They said recovery would be slow but possible. I nodded. I did not say that my normal life was already over. When Jenna left, I asked her to do one thing: call Thomas Klein. I was not ready to face my father. I was not ready to hear his version of events. But I was ready to see paperwork. Because if a man was willing to sign a DNR for his daughter, I did not believe it was the only signature he placed that night. And I was right. 3 hours later, Thomas Klein called back. He said, Ava, we need to talk about your grandmother's house and about a power of attorney filed Friday morning, less than 12 hours after your accident. I stared at the hospital ceiling, the white lights harsh. I remembered my grandmother on the porch. When the time comes, call Thomas Klein. Do not call anyone else. I do not know what she saw coming, but I know this: 10:46 p.m. was only the beginning, and I will read every line until every signature reveals the truth. Thomas Klein did not waste words. He went straight to the point the way seasoned attorneys do when they know the other side has made a serious mistake. Ava, the house in Naperville has been transferred. I went silent for a few seconds to make sure I had heard him correctly. He repeated it, transferred using a power of attorney. The filing time was Friday morning, 9:12 a.m. Less than 12 hours after you were admitted. I felt cold from the inside out. I asked, What power of attorney? Thomas said, A power of attorney in your name, electronically signed 2 weeks before the accident, authorizing Frank Reynolds to represent you in all property transactions related to Evelyn Hart's estate. I let out a hoarse laugh because my throat still hurt. I never signed that. I read POAs every week for a living. I know I did not sign it. Thomas continued. The signature looks like you, but it is not the signature of someone fully present. And more importantly, the notarization was done at an office more than 40 miles from your home, at a time when your work records show you were at the office. I closed my eyes. I was not surprised. I felt something else. Clarity. Planning. Thomas kept going. After the title transfer, the house was immediately used as collateral, a cash-out loan for $310,000. The funds have already been dispersed into an account in Frank Reynolds' name. I did not ask him to repeat the number. I absorbed each word the way I would read a case file. $310,000, I asked. Which bank? Thomas gave me the name. I knew that bank. I had handled mortgage files involving them. I asked. Where is my grandmother's will? Thomas said. The valid will was signed and notarized 6 months before she died. The sole beneficiary of the house is you, not Frank, not Brooke. I let that line sink in. Sole beneficiary. I remembered the snowy afternoon when she placed her hand over mine. When the time comes, do not let anyone make you feel you have no right to ask. I asked Thomas. Why did I never receive notice from your office? He paused for a second. We sent certified letters to your address. Twice. Both times there is a signature confirming receipt. My heartbeat slowed. Whose signature? Thomas said. Frank Reynolds. I stared at the white hospital ceiling. He blocked the information. He signed for the mail in my place. He filed a forged POA. He transferred the property. And he mortgaged it while I lay motionless in the ICU. I asked Thomas. Can you stop the house from being sold? Thomas said. The house has not been sold yet, but there is a note indicating intent to transfer after the loan is restructured. We can file a petition to void the transfer for forgery and abuse of authority. But you need to be prepared. There will be an investigation. There will be confrontation. I inhaled slowly. I had been in the legal world long enough to understand procedure. I knew what had to be done. I told Thomas, do not file the petition yet. He stopped. Why? I looked toward the door of my hospital room. The hallway was quiet. I said, I want to see how far they will go. I do not want them to know I am awake and that I know everything. Thomas was silent for a few seconds and then said, Are you sure? I answered. I have been silent for 32 years. I know how to wait. We agreed to send a preservation notice to the bank to freeze transactions without making a public move. At the same time, we requested complete copies of the notarization file. After the call, I set my phone down and looked at my hand. The IV was still in place. I thought back to that night. 10:46 p.m. He signed the DNR. Then the next morning at 9:12 a.m., he filed the forged POA. 2 timestamps. 2 signatures. 1 decision about my life. 1 decision about property. I do not believe in coincidence. That afternoon, Brooke walked into my hospital room. She wore an expensive coat and the familiar perfume. She took my hand and said, You scared the whole family. I looked at her. The whole family? I asked. Where is Dad? Brooke said he is busy handling Grandma's paperwork so everything does not fall apart. I nodded slightly. I said, I trust Dad will do everything reasonably. I saw her eyes flicker with a brief panic. She did not know I had spoken to Thomas. She did not know I knew about the $310,000. I did not blame her for her silence. I recorded it. After Brooke left, I texted Jenna. Do not tell anyone I talked to Thomas, Jenna replied immediately. I understand. I lay back and started organizing everything in my head like a litigation file. First, the DNR signed at 10:46. Second, the forged POA filed at 9:12 the next morning. Third, the will notices intercepted with Frank's signature for receipt. Fourth, the $310,000 loan. Each point connected. And I knew once they were connected, the picture would not be pretty. That night, Angela came in to check my vitals. I asked her one question. Does the hospital have a log showing when my father left? She said yes. 10:58 p.m. I closed my eyes. 12 minutes after signing me off to die, he left the hospital. No looking back, no waiting for an outcome. I opened my eyes and said to Angela, "Thank you for calling my proxy," she said. "I was just doing my job." I shook my head. "No, you did not overlook the small detail, and because of that I am still here." I looked out the window. Chicago was dull gray. I did not feel the rage I thought I would. I felt alert. Very alert. And I knew one thing. This time I will not only read the signatures, I will make the whole city see them. I was discharged on a gray morning, the Chicago sky heavy as if it might rain, but it did not. My father arrived to pick me up at 9:18. I know because I checked the clock when he walked in carrying a small black suitcase. He did not ask where I wanted to go. He said, "You will stay at home until you are fully recovered." Like it had already been decided. I smiled. "Thanks, Dad. But Jenna is picking me up. I will stay at her place for a few weeks." He looked at me longer than usual. Just a second, but enough for me to see something shift behind his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Whatever you want." His voice was light, not soft. Brooke stood behind him, arms folded. She said nothing. I looked at them both and wondered if they had already talked about the $310,000. I did not say anything else. I let them believe I was still recovering. I let them believe I was not strong enough to ask questions. Jenna drove me to her apartment in Logan Square. A small living room, warm light, the smell of coffee, traffic outside. I sat on the couch and opened my laptop. Thomas had sent a scanned copy of the forged POA. I looked at my signature at the bottom. The curve, the stroke, everything close enough that anyone unfamiliar would believe it. But I know my signature. I know the pressure when I write the first A. On this version, that pressure was missing. Lighter. More hesitant. I zoomed in on the notarization block. The notary's name was Mark Delaney. The office was in a small town south of the city. I had never been there. I checked my work calendar for the date listed on the POA. I was in the office from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. There are hallway cameras. There is electronic timekeeping. I had proof. I called Thomas. He answered immediately. "How far do you want to take this?" I said. "Send the dispute notice to the bank first. Do not file anything publicly. Not yet. I want them to think everything is still moving," Thomas said. "You are letting them go further on their own," I said. "Yes, if he thinks I know nothing, he will keep going, and every next step will become evidence." Thomas was quiet for a few seconds and then said, "You are more like your grandmother than you think." I did not respond to that. That evening my father called. He asked how I was feeling. I said I was still sore but okay. He said he had handled Grandma's house to avoid tax problems. I asked, "What taxes?" He said inheritance taxes, property taxes, things you do not need to worry about. I said, "I trust you." I heard him exhale lightly through the phone, like he had just cleared a small hurdle. After I hung up, I opened the bank file Thomas sent. The $310,000 loan was disbursed in 2 tranches. The first was $210,000. The second was scheduled within 14 days if there was no dispute. 14 days. I checked the calendar. Today was day 3 since the transfer. That meant they had 11 days left to draw the rest. I texted Thomas, "Freeze the second tranche now." Quietly. The next morning, Thomas confirmed the bank had received the dispute notice and had paused the remaining disbursement until the signature was verified. I did not feel victory. I felt a chess move placed in the right square. 3 days later, Brooke showed up at Jenna's apartment. She said she wanted to talk privately. I met her at a nearby coffee shop. Brooke sat across from me, hands on the table, eyes not quite meeting mine. "You should not blow this up," she said. I asked. "Blow what up?" she said. "Grandma's house. Dad just wants everything clean." Brooke sighed. "You know Dad always thinks about the family." I did not smile. I said, "Which family?" Brooke went quiet. I asked, "Do you know about the POA?" She lifted her head faster than I expected. "What are you talking about?" I kept my gaze steady. "My signature on the POA is forged." Brooke did not answer right away. She looked toward the window. I recognized that silence. Not shock. Calculation. I stood up. If you have something to say it soon. Because this is about to leave the living room. I walked out knowing one thing. Brooke knew more than she had just admitted. That night, I sat alone in Jenna's living room. I thought about my father standing in church for 15 years talking about honesty and responsibility. I thought about 10:46 p.m. I thought about 9:12 a.m. 2 signatures, 2 decisions, one about my life, one about my grandmother's property. I opened my email and drafted a message. Not a lawsuit, not an accusation. A note to the church board where my father handled finances. I did not send it. I only wrote it. I knew if I brought this into the light the right way, it would not be just a property dispute. It would be a question of ethics. And when ethics are placed on the table in public, men like my father have fewer places to hide. Before bed, I received an email from Thomas. There is one more thing you should know. I opened the attachment. It was a change of beneficiary form for my life insurance filed 3 years ago. The new beneficiary was Frank Reynolds. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I had never signed it. I sat in the living room darkness. My father did not only prepare for me to survive, he prepared for every version of me not surviving. And in every version, he got paid. I checked the time. 11:02 p.m. Nearly a full circle from the night he signed my DNR. I whispered to myself. This time I decide how this story ends. On Sunday morning, I woke up before Jenna did. The clock on my phone said 6:42. I lay there, staring at the ceiling for a few minutes, listening to the city start moving outside the window. I did not feel anxious the way I thought I would. I felt clear. I chose a simple white button-down and black pants. No jewelry except the small earrings my grandmother gave me for my 21st birthday. I tied my hair back neatly. Barely any makeup. I did not want to look like I was walking into a fight. I wanted to look like myself. Before I left the apartment, I checked my bag again. A notarized copy of the will. The forged POA file. The bank confirmation that the second disbursement had been frozen. The hospital internal record showing 10:46 p.m. And the life insurance beneficiary change form with a signature that was not mine. I did not bring emotions. I brought documents. The church where my father served sat on the edge of the city, and the parking lot was almost full when I arrived at 11:27. I saw his pickup truck right in the front row. I walked into the fellowship hall just as the community gathering after service began. About 100 people sat around folding tables. The smell of coffee and pastries hung in the air. My father stood near the microphone up front, talking with a few older men. He wore a dark gray suit. He saw me and flashed a wide smile. His eyes swept over me like he was checking whether I looked weak. I smiled back. Brooke sat at the table on the right. She stared longer than usual. No hello. The talk started at 12:03. My father took the microphone and spoke about gratitude. He talked about family. He talked about the trials that faith helps us survive. Then he moved to my story. He said his daughter had fought death and a miracle had happened. He said he had been by my side all night. I listened to each word hit the floor like shards of glass. I did not move until he said the last line. Family is where we sacrifice for each other. I stood up and walked to the front. My heart beat steady. Not fast. Not shaking. I said, "Can I say a few words, Dad?" The whole room turned to look at me. He could not refuse. Not in front of them. He handed me the microphone. His hand was warm and dry. I took it and looked straight at the faces waiting. I said, "Thank you for praying for me. I am alive today not because of a miracle, but because of a different signature." The room went silent. My father arrived at the hospital at 10:32 p.m. He did not come into my room first. He went straight to the billing desk. At 10:46 p.m., he signed a "Do Not Resuscitate" order. I opened my folder and held up a copy of the hospital record. The time was written clearly. I heard someone draw a sharp breath. I kept going. I lived because I signed a healthcare proxy 7 years ago. That person revoked the DNR and authorized continued treatment. Not my family. Not my father. Brooke half stood. then sat back down. My father stepped toward me. Ava, you are not well. You are confused. I looked at him. I am not confused, Dad. This is my job. I read signatures every day. I turned to the next page. This is Grandma's will. I am the sole beneficiary of the house. Not you. Not Brooke. I placed the will on the front table so the people in the first row could see the seal. I continued. The next morning at 9:12, a POA in my name was filed to transfer the house into my father's name. That signature is forged. I held up the POA. A man in the front row stood up to look closer. My father raised his voice. You are humiliating this family, I said. Which family, Dad? I flipped to the bank confirmation. After the transfer, the house was mortgaged for a $310,000 cash-out loan. I looked him in the eye. I heard whispering spread across the room. Brooke took a step back. My father said, It was a temporary decision to manage the asset. 3 years ago, you changed my life insurance beneficiary to yourself. That signature is forged too. I held it up a little longer so people could see it. I spoke slowly. In every scenario where I die, you get paid. The room went dead quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. I looked toward the pastor standing behind us. I said, I did not come here to cause a scene. I came to fix one thing, the truth. I turned back to my father. I have already had my attorney file a dispute notice with the bank. The loan has been frozen. The petition to void the transfer is prepared, and the police will receive the forgery file this week. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, as someone who was no longer a child sitting quietly in the back row. He said in a rough voice, You are going to send your own father to prison, I answered. You signed so I would die. I am signing to protect myself. An older woman in the front row covered her mouth. Another man shook his head slowly. Brooke stepped closer and whispered so only I could hear. You did not have to do this, I whispered back. You knew, did you not? Brooke did not answer. Her silence was the clearest answer. I set the microphone down on the table. I said to the whole room, You have a right to know who is managing your donations. I am sorry to interrupt the gathering, but numbers do not lie. And signatures do not either. I stepped back. No one clapped, no one spoke, but no one stood with him anymore. And I knew in that moment the story had already moved beyond that room. I left the hall before anyone could say anything else. I did not want to stay and watch whispers turn into direct questions. I knew it would happen. I did not need to witness it. I had put everything on the table. The rest was no longer mine. When I walked into the parking lot, the Chicago sun was strangely harsh compared to the gloomy morning. Jenna stood by the car, arms crossed. She looked at me and asked. I nodded. Everything just started. That afternoon my phone would not stop buzzing. Texts, missed calls, unknown numbers, familiar numbers. I did not answer right away. I went back to Jenna's apartment, sat down, and waited. Not for my father. I waited for the bank. At 4:17 p.m., Thomas called. His voice was calm as always. The bank has launched an internal investigation. They are requesting the original POA to examine the signature. And they have temporarily frozen the entire loan, not just the second tranche. The receiving account is also under review. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. Not from relief, from knowing the machine had started turning. On Monday morning, the bank sent an official letter demanding Frank Reynolds provide proof of the POA's validity within 5 business days. At the same time, Thomas filed a petition in county court to declare the POA void due to forgery. I did not need to push him. He understood timing. The news spread faster than I expected. Not through the press, not through social media, through phone calls between church board members. I received a message from an older woman who had hugged me on Sunday. We reviewed the financial records. Thank you for telling the truth. By Monday night, my father called. I let it ring 3 times, then answered. He did not greet me. He said, Are you satisfied now? I asked. What do you want to talk about? He said. You know I did not mean for you to die. You do not understand the pressure then. The bills, the responsibility. I cut him off. 10:46 p.m. was not pressure, it was a choice. A reputation does not disappear because I speak. It disappears because of what you did. He breathed hard into the phone. They are investigating me. They are asking about the POA, I said. If it is valid, you do not need to worry. He hung up before I finished the sentence. Tuesday morning, Brooke called. Her voice was shaking. They want me at the church board meeting tonight. They want to know if I knew anything about the property transaction. I asked. What are you going to say? Brooke said. What do you think I should say? I was quiet for a few seconds. Then I said, Tell the truth. Brooke gave a short laugh, not happy. The truth is never as simple as you think, I said. No, it is just painful. The meeting happened that night without me, but I knew the outcome the next morning. My father was asked to step away temporarily from the church finance role until the investigation was complete. No public vote, no loud accusation, just a silent decision. For him, that weighed more than any shouting ever could. That same day, the bank told Thomas the signature on the POA did not match the signature samples they had from my prior transactions. They sent the file to the fraud unit, and once a fraud file is opened, it is no longer a family matter. Wednesday afternoon, an investigator from the county prosecutor's office called Thomas requesting copies of the documents. Thomas asked me if I was ready to file an official complaint. I looked out the window. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the cinnamon smell in her kitchen. I thought about the rocking chair. And I said, yes. That night, I received another email from Thomas. During the review, he found something we suspected, but had not confirmed. The life insurance beneficiary change form was submitted from an IP address that matched the network at my father's house. I read that email 3 times, not because I did not understand, because I needed to be sure I missed nothing. My father was not reacting in a moment of panic. He had prepared. For every scenario. If I died of illness, if I died in an accident, if I could not speak for myself, he got paid. I did not feel a burst of anger. I felt a cold steadiness. Thursday, police went to my father's house to request an interview. I knew because Brooke texted me at 3:26 p.m. They are asking about the signatures. Can you stop this? I stared at that message for a long time. Then I replied, I did not start this. Brooke did not text back. That night, I sat alone at Jenna's kitchen table, a cup of tea gone cold in front of me. I thought about the years I sat in the back pew listening to my father talk about honesty. I thought about the times I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I understood something I had not understood for 32 years. Silence does not keep a family together. It only protects the person causing the harm. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I answered. A man introduced himself as the investigator handling the forgery case. He said they needed me to confirm that the signatures on the POA and the insurance form were not mine. I said, they are not. He asked if I was willing to provide signature samples and a statement. I said yes. When I hung up, I realized there was no way back. No version of this story where everything could be resolved in a living room. It had entered the legal system, and that system does not care about reputation. It only cares about evidence. I looked at the clock. 10:46 p.m., exactly 1 week since the night he signed the order to let me die. I do not believe in symbols, but I believe in timing. And I knew that no matter the outcome, I had stopped being the quiet daughter. I had become a witness. The hearing took place on a cold morning in early November. There was no audience, no applause, just thick case files and the clerk's steady voice reading into the record. I sat beside Thomas, my hand resting still on the table. My father sat across from me, not looking at me. Brooke was not there. The investigator presented the signature analysis results. It did not match. The notary admitted he did not meet me in person on the date listed on the POA. The bank confirmed the loan had been partially dispersed and then frozen due to the dispute. The court declared the power of attorney invalid due to forgery. The transfer of the house was voided. The loan was ordered to be repaid, and the criminal investigation continued under procedure. Everything was spoken in a neutral tone. No one yelled, no one cried. Only one thing changed. The truth was now written into an official record. When the judge struck the gavel to end it, I did not feel victory. I felt lighter, like I had finally set down a suitcase I had carried for years without realizing it. My father stood up first, walked past me without saying a word. I looked at him one last time in that room. No anger, no hatred, just a man facing the consequences of the choices he had signed. A few weeks later, the house in Naperville was returned to me as the legal owner. I went there alone on a mild, sunny afternoon. The wooden door still creaked when it opened. The cinnamon smell had faded, but the light in the kitchen was still warm. I walked to the lowest kitchen cabinet drawer, the one Grandma had told me to open if anything ever happened. The old key was still in my coat pocket. I turned it gently. The drawer opened slowly. Inside was a thick envelope and a small notebook. I sat down on the kitchen floor and opened the envelope. Her handwritten letter was shorter than I expected. You were not born to repay anyone's emotional debt. If you are reading this, it means you had to choose yourself. Do not apologize for that. I folded the letter back very slowly. For the first time since I woke up in the ICU, I let myself cry. Not from pain, not from anger, but because I finally understood I had never been anyone's bill. I had never been a debt that needed to be paid with silence. The months after that were not easy. The investigation kept going. Interviews, paperwork, lawyers moving back and forth. I did not share details publicly. Not because I was afraid, but because I did not want my story to revolve around him. I started fixing up the house. I replaced old paint, repaired the wooden porch, kept the rocking chair exactly the same. I worked part-time for a few months while I fully recovered. Every morning I made coffee in Grandma's kitchen and watched sunlight slide across the wooden tabletop. There were days I remembered 10:46 p.m. and wondered what would have happened if the proxy did not exist. But I did not live inside that question for long anymore. I lived in the present. Brooke sent me a short message months later. You were right. I did not reply. Forgiveness is not always a conversation. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let the past control your future anymore. I only know what I chose. I chose not to be silent. I chose to read every signature. I chose to set boundaries. And I chose not to apologize for protecting myself. If you have listened this far, maybe you have been placed in a position where you were expected to stay quiet to keep the peace. Maybe you have been told you owe your family because they raised you. I just want to ask you one thing. What was the first boundary you ever set for yourself? Share it if you want. I read every comment. If this story made you think, tap like so it can reach the people who need to hear it. And if you want more stories about standing on your own side when no one else does, you can subscribe. Not because I want a number, but because some truths only get told when someone is willing to listen.